The sun was setting low over the red hills when Caleb Rhodes rode into Redwater. The town looked small and tired, like it had seen too many years and not enough rain. Wooden houses leaned slightly to one side, their paint faded by dust and wind. A few people stood outside the general store watching him with wary eyes. His horse's hooves clicked softly on the dry ground, breaking the quiet. Caleb wasn't a man people welcomed. His face told stories he didn't want to repeat. Hard lines, a small scar above his left eye, and eyes so cold and distant that people whispered he had none at all. They called him Hollow Eye Rhodes. Once he had been famous across New Mexico for his quick draw and his deadly aim. But now, the name only reminded him of the things he wished he could forget. He had come to Redwater because he needed a place to hide. 3 days ago, in another town, a duel had gone wrong. He had meant to shoot a man who cheated him in cards. But the bullet went astray and struck a boy who had just stepped out of the saloon. Caleb hadn't slept since. He could still see the boy's face every time he closed his eyes. When he tied his horse near the saloon, a sign swung weakly above the door. The Silver Spur. The sound of a piano drifted faintly through the window, though it stopped when he stepped inside. The room grew quiet. A few men turned away, pretending not to see him. Behind the bar stood a woman with calm eyes and strong shoulders. Her name was Clara Belle Hargrove. She was in her early 30s with light brown hair pulled into a neat bun and a quiet grace that didn't fit this rough little town. Her husband had died in a mine collapse 3 years ago, and since then she ran the saloon alone. Caleb walked up to the bar, his boots leaving a trail of dust on the wooden floor. "Whiskey," he said softly. Clara studied him before she poured. "You new here?" He nodded, not looking at her. "Just passing through." "Redwater doesn't get many visitors," she said, handing him the glass. "I won't be one for long." He drank in silence. The warmth burned his throat but didn't chase the cold inside him. When he set the glass down, she was still watching him, curious. "You got a name, stranger?" He looked up for the first time and his pale eyes met hers. "Don't look at me, lady," he said quietly. "You don't want to see what I've done." The words hung in the air like dust after a gunshot. Clara didn't flinch. She simply wiped the bar with her rag and said, "Suit yourself. But if you're looking for a room, I've got one upstairs. It's not fancy, but it's clean." He hesitated. "I don't plan to stay long." "Most folks don't," she replied. He paid for the drink and the room, then climbed the narrow stairs. The floor creaked under his boots. The room smelled faintly of soap and wood. He dropped his saddlebag on the bed and looked out the window. The sunset painted the sky in red and gold, but he couldn't see beauty in it anymore. All he saw were the ghosts of his past. That night, the sound of laughter floated up from below. Clara's voice mixed with the piano's tune. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But Caleb knew peace didn't last for men like him. The next morning, he came down early, his hat pulled low. Clara was sweeping the floor. She gave him a nod. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. While she poured, a few townsfolk entered. Miners, a blacksmith, and a young woman carrying bread. They all glanced at Caleb but kept their distance. The gossip had already started spreading. By noon, everyone in Redwater would know that Hollow Eye Rhodes was staying in the Silver Spur. Clara finally spoke. "I heard your name last night." Some of the men were talking. "You used to ride with Jeb Crane's gang, didn't you?" Caleb's shoulders stiffened. He didn't answer. "They said you left them," she continued, "walked away after the Rio Mesa raid." He looked up slowly. "You believe everything you hear?" "No," she said. "But I believe what I see. You look like a man who's tired of running." He finished his coffee and pushed the cup aside. "Running's all I know," she smiled gently. "Maybe that's because you never stopped long enough to find anything worth staying for." He didn't reply, but her words stayed with him long after he left the saloon to walk through town. Redwater was quiet that day. A dry wind carried the smell of sand and iron. Men worked in the mines nearby, trying to keep their town alive while a railroad company tried to buy them out. Posters had gone up the week before offering money for anyone willing to sell their land. But those who refused received threats, broken fences, burned wagons, missing livestock. Everyone knew who was behind it. Jeb Crane and his gang, hired by the railroad to push people out. By afternoon, a small group of riders appeared at the edge of town. Dust rose around them like a storm. Caleb recognized the way they rode. Confident, careless, dangerous. His stomach tightened. He knew every one of them. They tied their horses outside the saloon and walked in laughing. The biggest of them, Jeb Crane himself, wore a black coat and a silver belt buckle shaped like a snake. His grin faded when he saw Caleb sitting quietly in the corner. "Well, I'll be," Jeb said loudly. "If it isn't Hollow Eye Rhodes." "I thought you were dead." Caleb didn't move. "You were close." The room went silent again. Clara stood behind the bar, eyes steady, hands resting on the counter. Jeb stepped closer, smirking. "Didn't think I'd find you hiding behind a woman's bar, Caleb. What happened? Lose your nerve?" Caleb's hand drifted toward his holster, slow but sure. The room tensed, but before he could draw, Clara spoke. "That's enough," she said firmly. "This isn't your place, Mr. Crane." Jeb turned to her, amused. "You got spirit, ma'am. But you don't want to stand between me and old friends." Clara didn't blink. "He's not your friend anymore." The men behind Jeb chuckled, but there was unease in their laughter. Caleb rose slowly, his eyes locked on Jeb. "Leave her out of it," Caleb said quietly. "You want me, I'll meet you outside." Jeb tilted his head. "Maybe later. I ain't here for a fight today." He grinned at Clara. "Nice place you got. Be a shame if something happened to it." He and his men turned and left, the sound of their boots echoing on the wooden floor. Caleb exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she set down the glass she'd been holding. "You brought trouble with you," she said softly. "I always do," he answered. "That's why I don't stay long." She took a deep breath and looked at him with quiet strength. "Maybe running isn't the answer this time." He looked down, shame and regret crossing his face. "You don't understand, Miss Hargrove. I've done things I can't make right." She shook her head. "You can't change the past, but you can choose what you do next." He didn't reply. Instead, he walked toward the door. Outside, the sky was turning red again, the same color it had been when he rode into town. He paused on the porch and looked back at her. "Don't look at me, lady," he said softly once more. But this time Clara stepped forward, her voice gentle yet strong. "Maybe that's what you need, Mr. Rhodes. Someone to really look at you, not the stories, not the name, just you." He said nothing. The wind stirred the dust between them, and for a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. Then he turned and walked out into the fading light. That night, Clara stood by the window upstairs watching his shadow move in the street below. He didn't know it, but she was already deciding not to let him ride away so easily. For the first time in a long while, Redwater had a storm coming, and this time, it wasn't just in the weather. The morning came quietly in Redwater. The streets were still and the air carried a thin chill. Caleb Rhodes had been awake all night, sitting outside the Silver Spur with his hat pulled low, watching the sunrise. He hadn't slept a single hour. His mind kept replaying Jeb Crane's mocking smile, Clara's calm eyes, and the words she had spoken the night before. Words that hit deeper than any bullet ever had. He thought about leaving again. He could pack his saddlebag, ride out before the town woke, and disappear into the desert. That was what he always did. That was what he was good at. But something inside him held him still, something quiet and unfamiliar. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was Clara. When Clara stepped outside holding a cup of coffee, she wasn't surprised to see him there. "Didn't sleep?" she asked gently. Caleb shook his head. "Sleep doesn't come easy." She handed him the cup. "Then drink. You'll need your strength." He frowned slightly. "For what?" She looked toward the hills. "For what's coming." Jeb Crane doesn't make empty threats. When he says he'll be back, he means it. Caleb stared at the horizon where the sunlight touched the dusty ridges. "Then I'll leave before he does." "No," Clara said firmly. "If you leave, he'll tear this town apart. He'll take everything the people here worked for. You think running saves anyone? It doesn't. It just gives men like him the power to destroy what's good." He met her eyes. "You don't understand what it means to face men like Jeb. They don't stop. They don't care who gets hurt." "I do understand," she said. "I lost my husband to men like him, and I'm not about to lose my town too." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were filled with something fierce and determined. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was heavy but not cold. Finally, Caleb sighed. "If I stay, people could get hurt." "If you leave, everyone will," she replied softly. He looked away, his hands tightening around the coffee cup. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him wanted to run, but another part, The part that had been silent for years wanted to stay and fight. Later that morning, news spread that Jeb Crane and his men were gathering near the river. The town grew restless. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to hide. Clara stood in the middle of the saloon and called everyone together. "Running won't save us," she said. "If we stand together, we have a chance. And we're not alone. Mr. Rhodes knows those men better than anyone." All eyes turned to Caleb. He stood near the door, arms crossed. "You want to trust me?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "I do." The townsfolk hesitated, whispering to one another. Some looked scared, others doubtful. Finally, an old miner spoke up. "You used to ride with them, didn't you?" Caleb nodded once. "I did, but I'm not one of them anymore." "Not for a long time." Another man, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "Then maybe you can help us stand a chance." Caleb looked around the room, at the faces lined with fear, hope, and weariness. These people weren't fighters. They were miners, farmers, mothers, and sons. But they had courage. He could see it in the way they stayed, even when every instinct told them to run. "All right," he said finally. "If we're doing this, we do it smart." He began to plan with them. He showed them how to use the old barrels and wagons to make barriers across the street. He helped the men set up rifles at the windows of the general store and the blacksmith's shop. He taught them where to stand, where to move, how to stay low. He spoke in short, simple words, the way a man does when he's been in too many fights to waste breath. Clara worked beside him the whole time. She helped calm the frightened and kept everyone fed. Though her hands shook slightly when she passed him a tool, her eyes never wavered. Every time he looked at her, he felt that strange thing inside him growing stronger, something he had thought was long gone: purpose. As night fell, the town became quiet again. The people went inside, waiting for whatever the dawn would bring. Caleb sat on the saloon steps, cleaning his old revolver. Clara came out with 2 cups of coffee. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "But I can't run anymore." She smiled faintly. "Then that's enough." For a moment they sat together in silence, the air cool and still. Somewhere far off a coyote cried, and the wind rustled the dry grass. Caleb looked at her and said softly, "You should leave town tonight." "It's not safe." "I'm not leaving," she said. "If this town falls, I fall with it." He wanted to argue, but he saw the strength in her eyes. He nodded instead. Before dawn, a red glow touched the hills. Then the sound came, hooves, many of them. The gang was coming. The people of Redwater were ready. They took their places, hearts pounding. Caleb stood in the center of the main street, hat low, gun at his side. The morning air was cold, but his hands were steady. Jeb Crane rode in with his men, laughing. "Well, well," he shouted. "You really think you can stop me, Hollow Eye?" Caleb stepped forward. "Turn around, Jeb. This isn't your fight anymore." Jeb grinned. "Oh, it's my fight, all right. You ran from me once. I'm not letting you do it again." Caleb didn't answer. The street was still. Then, like thunder, the first shot rang out. The battle for Redwater began. The townspeople fired from behind wagons and windows, shouting to one another. Dust and smoke filled the air. Caleb moved fast, protecting those who couldn't shoot. He didn't fire to kill, only to protect. Every time he could, he aimed to wound, not destroy. Clara stayed inside the saloon, helping the wounded, her hands stained with dust and tears. She glanced through the window every few seconds, her heart racing as she watched Caleb face the men he once called brothers. Finally, it came down to just 2 men standing in the street, Caleb and Jeb. Jeb's voice was hard and proud. "You always thought you were better than us," he said. "Now look at you, standing with the very people we used to rob." Caleb's voice was quiet but strong. "I was wrong, Jeb, about a lot of things, but not today." They faced each other in the golden light of morning. Time slowed. The wind blew a trail of dust between them. Then both men reached for their guns, but Caleb was faster. His bullet hit Jeb's gun, knocking it from his hand. Jeb froze, staring at him in disbelief. "Do it," Jeb spat. "Finish it." Caleb shook his head. "No, not this time." He dropped his gun and turned away. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire had been. When the smoke cleared, the townspeople stepped out one by one. The gang was gone, and Redwater still stood. Clara walked toward Caleb. He was standing at the edge of town, staring at the rising sun. His clothes were torn, and there was dust on his face, but his eyes were calm for the first time in years. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "We did. There was a pause, and then he said, I have to go. The marshal will come for me. I've done things I need to answer for. Clara's voice trembled slightly. Then I'll wait. He looked at her with a tired, grateful smile. You said not to look at me, remember? She smiled back. I did. But I see you now, Caleb Rhodes. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked away toward the horizon. Weeks passed. Redwater began to heal. The mine reopened, the saloon filled with laughter again, and Clara found herself smiling more often. Then one morning a letter arrived. It was from the territorial prison. The handwriting was careful, the words few. Redwater still stands. That means something. Maybe someday I'll stand there too. CR. Clara folded the letter gently, her eyes shining. She placed it under the counter beside a small drawing that had come with it. A sketch of the Silver Spur, with a lone rider in the distance heading toward the sunrise. And though no one said it aloud, everyone in Redwater knew that the man who once called himself Hollow Eye Rhodes had finally found peace. Not by running from his past, but by facing it, and by finding someone who believed he could still be good.